Yasodanandana Brajana Ranjana Ramunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabihari Jaya Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Namaskar Hardas Thakur ki jai, Param Sagahal, Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita Gadadhar, Shri Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Sri Sri Radha Krishna, Gopina, Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan ki jai, Sri Vrindavan Dham ki jai, Navadvip Dham ki jai, Gang Jamuna Tulsi Bhakti Devi ki jai, Ananda Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai, Samabhatta Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Go Premanandi. All glories to the Son of the devotees, all glories to the Son of the devotees, all glories to the Son of the devotees, all glories to Sri Guru Sri Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namani Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvachesha Shunyavadi Paschatchadesha Tarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sri Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Burning Pranam Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 74, Verse 47. Ritvik Vyasa Sasada Sevyo Dakshinam Vipulam Ada Sarvam Sampuja Vidiva Chakreva Vrita Mekara. Ritvigya to the priests, Sasade Sevya, along with the members of the assembly, Dakshinam, gifts and gratitude, Vipulam, abundant, Adat, he gave, Sarvan, all of them, Sampuja, properly worshipping, Vidivat, according to scriptural injunctions, Chakre, executed, Avabratam, purificatory bathing, Ekarat, the Emperor Yudhisthira. Translation: Emperor Yudhisthira gave generous gifts to the sacrificial priests and members of the assembly, properly honoring them, all in the manner prescribed by the Vedas. He then took the Avabrita bath. Thus, Krishna, the Lord of all masters of mystic yoga, saw to the successful execution of this great sacrifice on behalf of King Yudhisthira. Afterwards, the Lord stayed with his intimate friends for a few months at their earnest request. Purport: although Lord Krishna is the master of all masters of yoga, such as Lord Shiva, still he was controlled by King Yudhisthira's pure love. Thus, the Lord personally saw to the successful completion of the king's sacrificial performance, and after that, he agreed to stay with his dear friends in Indraprastha for a few more months. Then the Lord, the son of Devaki, took the reluctant permission of the king and returned to his capital with his wives and ministers. I have already described to you in detail the histories of the two residents of Vaikuntha who had to undergo repeated births in the material world because of being cursed by brahmanas. Purified in the final Avabrita ritual, which marked the successful completion of the Rajasuya sacrifice, King Yudhisthira shone among the assembly of brahmanas and kshatriyas like the king of the demigods himself. The demigods, humans, and residents of intermediate heavens, all properly honored by the king, happily set off for their respective domains while singing the praises of Lord Krishna and the great sacrifice. Purport: according to Shuddha Swami, the term Kechara here refers to pramatas, mystic yogis who accompany Lord Shiva. All were satisfied except sinful Duryodhana, the personification of the age of coral and the disease of the Kuru dynasty. He could not bear to see the flourishing opulence of the son of Pandu. Purport: the prophet writes, Duryodhana by nature was very envious because of his sinful life, and he appeared in the dynasty of the Kurus as a chronic disease personified in order to destroy the whole family. Sri Daswami mentions that Duryodhana hated pure religious principles. One who recites these activities of Lord Vishnu, including the killing of Shishupala, the deliverance of the kings, and the performance of the Rajasuya sacrifice, is freed from all sins. Thus end the purports of the humble service of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada to the 10th canto, 74th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled The Deliverance of Shishupala at that Rajasuya Sacrifice. So this concludes this whole episode of the Rajasuya, which also included the killing of Jarasandha and the freeing of the kings. And within this story here we get the killing of Shishupala and his liberation and his entrance into Vaikuntha. And as was stated before, the whole purpose of this sacrifice was a glorification of Krishna. Yudhisthira did this simply as a service to Krishna, to show that Krishna should be worshipped by everyone, which was to be pointed out in the sacrifice. And actually, Sahadeva is the one that pointed out Krishna as the qualified person, as the object of worship. And of course, Yudhisthira, by his activities as a king, being established as a king, he would simply use all of his wealth to worship and glorify Krishna. So we know that some people are suspicious. You worship the Lord and he will take everything away from you. That is a common conception. And that comes up later in the Bhagavatam, where the question is asked, why is it that people who worship Vishnu are so poor and people who worship Shiva are so rich? And it's opposite, because Shiva's got no clothing and he's sitting covered with ashes on the where they burn the bodies. And Vishnu is sitting in Vaikuntha with all gold, palace, etc. And you worship him and you don't get anything. Devotees are poor and the devotees of Shiva are very rich. So there is a suspicion that if you worship the Supreme Lord, then you don't get any material opulence. But that's not so, because we see here the opposite. We see that Yudhisthira has everything. So this is an example of, by worshiping the Lord, everything is supplied. As at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, there it is said that where there's Krishna and Arjuna, there's all opulence, Shri. All victory and fame and righteousness, etc. Everything is there for the devotee. However, according to the situation, some devotees accept those things as favorable, others may not. So generally, those who are Nitya Siddhas, they are not harmed by any aspect of material wealth, and they don't become proud of their possessions. Exalted devotees like the Nitya Siddhas, or even persons like the great kings in the Manu's dynasty, they accept all of this, and there's no harm to their spiritual life at all. Just as in Vaikuntha we have Vishnu on his throne, and he is not affected by anything, so devotees also are not affected by anything. So it's described in the spiritual world. There, the devotees, Nitya Siddhas, and even Sadhana Siddhas, they can have anything they want, because they have such a sankalpa. If they wish for anything, immediately it's there. So therefore, they can have all sorts of wealth, which of course is spiritual there, spiritual gold, spiritual diamonds, spiritual rubies, etc. Anything you want, any ornament you want, you can have. And any house, palace you want, you can have also. And any quality you want, and any power, any siddhi you want, like a yogi, any siddhi you want, you can have that also. So everything is available for the devotees there, and they don't misuse them. In fact, they use them for service to the Supreme Lord. That's the only way in which they use these different things. So similarly, in the material world, we have devotees here like Yudhisthira. He uses things for the Supreme Lord, and he never thinks of using it for himself at all. And thus this whole Rajasuya sacrifice, which is a very grand display of wealth and worship, was simply for glorifying Krishna and nothing else. So we see here that actually, though there were so many events leading up to the great Rajasuya sacrifice, it's not even described here. There's no one word. It says they held the sacrifice and then they bathed, and that was it, finished. And then one little verse is describing the whole Rajasuya. So there's, it was in itself, it was not very interesting for Yudhisthira. The main thing was Krishna, so therefore it spends more time glorifying Krishna, saying how he stayed there for 2 months afterwards with the Pandavas and gave them company, and then he returned to Dwarka. So the devotees are in no way harmed by any of these opulences. And we see many cases of the descendants from Manu also. Priyavrata didn't want to accept the kingdom. He wanted to just stay and be a brahmachari for the rest of his life and whatever. But he was persuaded finally that he should accept the kingdom, and he could still progress in spiritual life. Dhruva accepted. He didn't want to accept, but Vishnu made him accept the whole kingdom, and then to rule over Dhruvaloka even. So in this way, and Ambarish, of course, great king. So many examples of great kings who ruled, and they had the whole wealth of the world, but they were not affected at all. On the other hand, then we find others, when they get a position of rulership as a king, or they get wealth, or they desire these things, they manifest all bad qualities. So often in the Bhagavatam we see that wealth leads to pride, and then pride leads to all sorts of other problems. As in the case of the sons of Kuvera, they were, because Kuvera had all the money, they became proud, and then they offended Narada Muni, and he cursed them to become trees. So pride is a very, very dangerous thing, and it usually arises from wealth. Here we find Duryodhana was in this position. Here it describes him as personification of Kali Yuga. So before Kali Yuga came, some years before Kali Yuga had really actually entered, he entered secretly as Duryodhana. So this is where the problem started with Duryodhana. He was entering in a little bit early, and he caused problem for everyone. Which means that he was very sinful. Kali Yuga means lots of sin. So Duryodhana was very sinful. Now he didn't appear to be sinful in some ways, because when he was ruling, many people thought, oh, he's a very good king, because he was very generous and this and that and whatever. But actually he was very sinful, because ultimately he rejected Supreme Lord when he was there in person. He did not accept Krishna. So whatever nice things he did, whatever charity works he did, were actually empty or meaningless, because the center of all of that is worship of the Supreme Lord. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur describes we have a varnashram system, and everybody follows the rules and regulations, but there must be acceptance of the Supreme Lord there. If there is not, it may look very nice and people are doing things according to a very regular manner. No acceptance of the Supreme Lord is useless. So it's called Asuric Varnashram. It looks very nice, but actually it's completely useless. The other is Daiva Varnashram, where there is acceptance of the Supreme Lord, and people go about their activities, but they also have faith in the Lord. So the two systems can be very similar, following the same rules, etc., but mind is different. And who determines that? The leader. So Duryodhana's the leader. Everyone in his kingdom will also be like that. They will just be doing their activities without the Lord, and they will try to accrue position, fame, wealth, accept power, all this. So Duryodhana was the personification of all of this, all these bad qualities. And it's described here, he was very envious, which means that he desired whatever Yudhisthira had. He saw that and then said, I should have that, I deserve that. Yudhisthira doesn't deserve this, the Pandavas don't deserve this, I want this. So in other words, he developed hatred of the Pandavas because of their position, their wealth, their power, etc. Unfortunately, he didn't realize that all this was related to worship of Krishna. Why Yudhisthira was in that glorious position? Because he accepted the Supreme Lord. So Duryodhana wanted all of that without the Supreme Lord. So he thought, oh, we just fight with them, take it all away from them, then I get this nice position. So it is something like Ravana trying to grab Sita. To get Lakshmi without accepting Vishnu. So similarly here, he won't accept Supreme Lord, but he wants all the Lakshmi. He wants all of the opulence, all the power, all the kingdom, etc. So that is the mood of the demon, the materialist. And this person may superficially exhibit nice qualities, but actually he has a lot of bad qualities which will eventually manifest. So that we see in the case of Duryodhana. His bad qualities were not so explicitly manifest at this time, but gradually those bad qualities began to manifest more and more as time went on, until ultimately there was the whole battle of Kurukshetra, and finally he was also annihilated. So we see the contrasting natures here of the two parties. Yudhisthira completely dedicated to the Lord, and the Lord completely dedicated to him, so that he would stay with him. Actually, when he was here in Indraprastha, he was absent from Dwarka. So then the people of Dwarka are in lamentation when Krishna is away. But he, in spite of that, he stayed in the palace of Yudhisthira for several months, out of great attraction to his devotees there, the Pandavas. Very, very dedicated to his devotees. So there was a nice interaction between Yudhisthira and Krishna. Yudhisthira was dedicated to Krishna, and Krishna was completely under the control of Yudhisthira. So that shows the wonderful quality of devotional service and the Supreme Lord. In contrast to that, we have Duryodhana, who attended this sacrifice and then became envious of all the remarkable elements in the palace and of the position of the Pandavas and Yudhisthira. And he didn't accept Krishna at all. So therefore he was ultimately doomed. Krishna does not hate anybody, but we see that ultimately this whole battle took place, arranged by the Supreme Lord to annihilate the Kurus and Duryodhana. So we see opposite, very intimate relationship between Krishna and Yudhisthira, and then completely opposite with Duryodhana. Finally, the Lord had to arrange for him to be killed, just as Sisupala was killed. So he arranged this whole battle of Kurukshetra, and finally Duryodhana was killed. So completely opposite relationship with the Lord and opposite destinations. So the whole Bhagavatam is meant to glorify Krishna, and particularly Krishna among the different forms of the Lord. Here we see one story to show how Krishna is the center of the life of the Pandavas, as well as the Yadus. So Krishna is a form of the Lord, but also very special. So he's the most excellent form of the Supreme Lord, and therefore he's called Swayam Bhagavan. So the purpose of the Bhagavatam is not only to direct people to worship Krishna, but show how among all the different forms, he is the supreme form. So through these various stories, we will get illustrations of that. And this is one such story to show how Krishna has a particularly wonderful nature. And this is exhibited here, where he falls under the control of his devotee Yudhisthira. And therefore he stays with him, even though the people of Dwarka are longing for him also. He's under the control of Yudhisthira, and he serves him very nicely. So this is not the only case. We'll find other cases where he serves the Pandavas in many ways. So this is a quality of the Supreme Lord in general. And we see this in the case of Ambarish, how the Lord is under the control of Ambarish also, and he gives him a Sudarshan Chakra. But here we find more elaborate arrangements by which the Lord obeys his devotees, is under the control of his devotees, as here in the case of Krishna and Yudhisthira. So in other words, we find remarkable qualities in Krishna, particularly in his relationship with his devotees and his remarkable affection for his devotees, so that he's willing to serve them in all ways. So that is illustrated here in this story as well.
You see, you explained that although the Holi is supposed to come a little bit late, it came a little bit early. Now you see, the Balaram, who is the supreme person of Godhead, is not known as Krishna, but he supports Duryodhana with a Holi personification. How is that?
Well, this is only pastime. Ultimately, if he had really supported him, then he also could not be defeated. So this was only within the context of obligations within that whole dynasty. So because he had taught him, he was like a guru for him. He taught him how to fight with a club or whatever. So there was some relationship there. So based on that, then we say he had some attachment. But ultimately, not attached, because when he was to die, then he accepted that also. So, of course, he stayed away from the whole battle of Kurukshetra, isn't it? But all of this is, we can say, just part of the pastimes where Balaram shows a rather independent nature. He's not always completely in agreement with Krishna. Sometimes he disagrees with Krishna in different cases, also other instances as well. And he goes off and does something else. So he shows his independent nature as the Supreme Lord also. But ultimately, again, he understands Duryodhana is ultimately evil, and he's one of the demons that has to be annihilated. So therefore, he doesn't interfere with that plan.
But even last battle, also when Balaram came to support Duryodhana, because obviously he has an affection, but Duryodhana is a holy personification. So can you say that even Lord also has affection, those who are bad?
Well, ultimately, then he didn't support him because he allowed Duryodhana to be killed according to the plan of Krishna. So therefore, ultimately, we can say it's a superficial attachment. Not really attached ultimately. Personification of God, we know he was envious. Troubles to all. Sometimes in the association of devotees, there may be some who act as devotees but carrying envious mentality, causing trouble to other devotees. It's mentioned that demons enter in disguise in devotees to cause problems. How to handle such devotees who create problems? Well, if they're continually problematic, then we have to see ultimately why. Do they have actual sincerity? Or maybe they don't really have sincerity. They're just materialistic people who are taking advantage of devotional dress or whatever for their material reasons. That may be one thing. So these are called pretenders. So we shouldn't associate with such people. Others may have some sincere sentiments, but they may also have a lot of problems, psychological problems, etc., which they cannot control, and they're helpless. So therefore also this is not so good, because this will interfere with their own devotional service and also interferes with other devotees as well. So a little bit problematic. So we can try to help these people, but sometimes it's very, very difficult. And in the meantime, they can do a lot of damage also. So best to avoid them also. They can practice, but they can practice separate from everybody else. Because not only they will progress very slowly, but they will also disturb the progress of other devotees. So in the interest of the whole, we sometimes have to do that. So we don't discourage them from practicing, but nevertheless we have to be very careful how we associate with them. Others may have problems which are periodic, which means some anartha periodically manifests. So that's not so serious, because we know that if a person has strong enough bhakti, then that bhakti will gradually destroy those anarthas as they progress, and therefore they become insignificant as time goes on. So there's a little line we have to draw between serious problems and problems which may manifest but which are likely to disappear. And we have to separate these two types of devotees. So we can tolerate those whose problems are gradually disappearing. On the other hand, those who have continual problems, then we have to be very serious about how to handle them and how to relate them with other devotees.
Maharaj, in this pastime, we can see that Yudhishthir is a devotee, or he's like showing his affinity for God.
What's that?
In this particular Rajasuya sacrifice, we can see that Yudhishthir is a devotee of the Lord because he is glorifying Lord, putting Lord before everyone else. Arjun also, we know from the Gita pastime that he is a devotee of the Lord. The other three brothers, they followed Yudhishthir as dutiful brothers, or they were devotees of the Lord. There is no independent pastime for them. So how do we understand?
Well, in the Bhagavatam, we don't hear too much about him. Of course, Bhima was involved in this whole incident of killing Jarasandha. In the Mahabharata, we'll find more descriptions of the other Pandavas. And here we have Sahadev glorifying Krishna in the Rajasuya sacrifice. Definitely, they seem to have lesser roles, though Madhvacharya says that Bhima actually is the main hero of the whole Mahabharata. So he glorifies Bhima among all other of the Pandavas as being the supreme, Pandava in one sense. So there are more stories about particularly Bhima in the Mahabharata. But here the Bhagavatam is mainly concentrating on Krishna. So they're all Nityasiddhas, so there's it's not that they are, not important devotees, but main subject is Krishna, and therefore whatever pastimes Krishna displayed in the material with the Pandavas, that those are mentioned.
Though Duryodhana is sinful, like other brothers, other sons of the Rashtrapta were sinful, how come they went to heavenly planets after that, dying in the battlefield?
Well, we can explain that in terms of following Kshatriya Dharma, but then again we can understand that all of this is more or less, we don't hear it in the Bhagavatam. We hear it in the Mahabharata, this whole story of the Pandavas being hellish, going to hell, and the Duryodhana in heaven, etc., which is more or less, not really so Siddhantic as far as we're concerned, because the devotees are eternal associates to the Lord, so they never have to suffer, and actually they go to the spiritual world, not to anywhere in Svargaloka or whatever. So those are stories to illustrate other principles for people involved in karma.
How do you understand common man, like perform simple activity, also go to heavenly planet like all of us?
What I'm saying, all of this is simply to illustrate certain things. They followed Kshatriya Dharma, so therefore they get some reward. But obviously, because they were so sinful, they shouldn't get that result. So therefore, it's not a real, it's not an absolute picture of what happens, and it's not a glorification of Duryodhana, etc., because they were actually very sinful. So we don't expect the personification of Kali mentioned in the first canto, who was beating at the bull's legs, that he would go anywhere because he was so sinful, because he's also the personification of Kali, but he was actually a disguised Sudra who would disguise himself as a Kshatriya. So we can say Duryodhana also was not a real Kshatriya ultimately. He was just a very sinful person.
There is one statement in Srimad Bhagavatam, in Mahabharata, it says that when Duryodhana was dying, he was telling that, see, what is dharma, what is adharma, I know, but I don't know why I'm not able to follow this. Someone is like forcing me to the adharma. That is one statement like this. So Duryodhana was saying this. So can you say that Duryodhana is taking the part of the role of the, like adharma, but he's a devotee?
I've never heard that mentioned anywhere. Otherwise, why would it say he's personification of Kali if he were actually a devotee?
Kali was a devotee because he's not doing his own one.
Huh?
Kali is a devotee. Indirectly, he's a devotee.
Well, from the absolute point of view, everybody's a devotee, but in our terms, no, they're materialists. In the last verse, Krishna stresses Vishnu. Why use that word? Well, every name of Vishnu can also be applied to Krishna because it has a general meaning. Vishnu means all-pervading, and in terms of Krishna, that means that his fame pervades everywhere, or that he himself spreads himself out for his devotees. So therefore, he stayed in Indraprastha, with his devotees there, in spite of the fact he should be in Dwarka. And he can spread himself other places as well to satisfy his devotees.
You are explaining that Duryodhana's character. He was running after name, fame, success without accepting Krishna as the Supreme Lord. Even sometimes in the devotees community also, devotees also expect now name, fame, all the things of the Supreme Lord. What is the difference here? What is the difference here? Devotee accept the Supreme Lord, still they are expecting name, fame, success, and they are thinking that everything should happen according to me, or everything should happen in my what I want.
Well, if devotees think like that, then they have material attachments. Their bhakti is not pure. That means that out of bhakti they're expecting material results.
So it's again my comment. How to understand that one is serious in a devotional life? How to understand it?
Who should understand?
How to in general statement, how to understand one is serious in spiritual life?
Who should understand?
Who should understand? How to understand the person?
The person himself or some other person.
Other person, yeah.
Well, ultimately only that person knows, but from external symptoms, eventually we can see that if he is serious about bhakti, he progresses and he develops no material attachments and great attachment to the Lord. On the other hand, one who's not serious will manifest all sorts of material attachments, pride, etc. The anarthas will begin to show.
But in general, now suppose many devotees come into temple and they have their own external behavior, external activities. By seeing these external activities, can you understand that he is advancing or not advancing?
Well, to some degree. But we have to analyze very carefully and over a long period of time.
It's also mentioned that one car driver can know another car driver. Only one doctor will know another person's doctor. Unless one is a pure devotee, he can't see the system of another pure devotee. Or he may just think that seeing the external thing, he may think he's a pure devotee.
In general, a superior devotee can understand a person on a lower level. So that's a general principle as well.
Jagai Mother, they were demonic, but they were given mercy. So the question may be arise, why Duryodhana was not given that?
Well, Chaitanya is very special that he, even for the aparadis, he gives great mercy. So that's Lord Chaitanya's special thing, whereas in other instances, the Lord will give mercy by killing the demon or the aparadi. But in case of Lord Chaitanya, he actually makes him into a devotee. So that's Lord Chaitanya's special quality of mercy.